My name is Luke Murphy, and I am the choreographer and the director and the artistic director of Attic Projects. Attic Projects is a company that sits between dance and theatre. So all of the pieces, the reason it's called Attic Projects is there was a kind of point in time where I kind of felt like I had all of these ideas and they were just sitting there in the, I'll get to these at some point. And it felt like the time was kind of now. So it was around like not letting things, I think of the attic as a place where things get stored and things kind of gather dust. And the idea was to kind of take all those things that I wanted to do and actually start doing them. So that's where the name comes from. And the work, every piece kind of finds its own route. So I kind of believe that if a piece wants to be a book, it should be a book. If a piece wants to be a series of photographs, it should be a series of photographs. So I try not to feel like the form of the work has to be dictated just by the background that I have or the experience that I have, but that each project takes on its own life, and that then we work as a whole company then to kind of find the right vessel and the right way of bringing that into the world. I mean, I love it here. I just love it here. Yeah, everyone's so nice. Everyone's so good at their job. The space is I mean, I'd love to meet the architects of the space sometime. I've a really interest in architecture. My cousin's an architect, so I have all these books. I have like a fan's appreciation of architecture, and like the way this building has been designed, the way it functions. It's just so nice. So I like, it's probably the relationship of like a really happy dog that's been found who's just like, this is great. I just think this is great. I'm so happy to be here. I'm so happy to be here. Can I hang out here a bit more? Yeah, I really like it. When we were here in 2024, it was lovely. It was lovely. I worked here for a really long time as a performer, and that run of Volcano, it was a big opportunity for my work to be seen by a bigger audience. And every opportunity is also an opportunity to fail. So you're like, it's equal opportunity. I have equal opportunity for this to be great and opportunity for this to be terrible. So I was really relieved that it wasn't terrible, but it was lovely because I got to bring my work back to a community and to a city where I kind of grew up. Like I grew up as an adult in New York, and as an artist. I grew up as an artist in New York in a major way. And also, not only did audience come, and not only did the show go well, and all of that kind of stuff, which is lovely, but I'd look out at the ending of the show, and there'd be a person who I danced with for 4 weeks in a gig 15 years ago out there, and there'd be a choreographer who was like the first person I ever worked with when I was an apprentice, who they're out there, and the sense of also getting to share who I am now as an artist and what I'm trying to do now with a community that and an audience that were so formative in me figuring out what that is it's been really special. It's really, really special. And to come back is really, really special. Yeah, it's lovely. I would say the most evident inspiration for it is a play by John B. Keane called The Field, which was also turned into a film in the 90s. And in Ireland, that's a very kind of seminal story. It's about this farmer who kills, a person comes into town and buys land that this farmer's renting, and this farmer, with no feeling like the options in their life are closing in around them, ends up killing this person who's come into town and bought this land. And that story was inspired by a real life crime that happened in I want to say the 50s. And that crime has happened over and over and over and over again in Ireland. Crimes to do with land and to do with inheritance. It's the most frequent cause of violent crime in Ireland. So we basically kind of re-examined that piece of theatre came from being inspired by this crime. This crime keeps on happening. So then we thought, what would it be then to take the play as a jumping off point and create a new story, but with the same kind of inspiration. So being inspired by a fictional event rather than one specific real life event. And then from there, there's ghosts of once you're collecting once you're collecting a piece in your head, like everything becomes relevant to it. It's almost like the universe starts delivering things to you that you're like, oh, that has something to do with this, and that has something to do with this. So the TV show The Jinx, it was, I found myself rewatching, and like that's a fascinating, everyone definitely needs to watch The Jinx. There was a book by Mark O'Connell called A Thread of Violence, which is a really, really fascinating read, kind of disturbing, but a really fascinating read. And then also Land, and like, I think it's really universal, but being in Ireland, having moved back to Ireland a few years ago, there is something in my home, in myself, that is very, very interesting about how I think we relate to ownership, how I think we relate to land. And there's a book called The Land Is All That Matters that kind of, it kind of interrogates that. It interrogates from a very different way than we're interrogating it, but it names a lot of things that I think are very real. And I think are very real away from me, and I think are very real even within me. So this piece is kind of a way of sharing a lot of curiosities I have around that. I think that I do find inspiration in a lot of different places. I think that when you're working on something, and when you kind of realize what you're really, sometimes for me anyway, a piece comes out of a question. So I'll have a question, I'll have a curiosity about something, and then to deal with that, I try and find like really far fantasy. So if the more real the thing I want to deal with, the more encouraged I find myself being to look towards a story that is very far away from the reality of the thing I'm talking about. So that kind of means that it's almost like the Big Bang. Like you kind of have this idea, and then that goes, and then there's you kind of see connections to it in a really wide variety of places. So, songs, like I listen to a lot of music. I'll make a playlist before my sound designer loves this. I just make a playlist based on all the things. So anytime I'm writing a scene, I'm listening to a specific song when I'm writing. And then I kind of have that playlist that I give to my sound designer to say, like, these are some of the things, these are some of the feelings, some of the moods that I'm kind of dealing with. I think about space quite a lot. So the space of the work and the world of the work come, and the atmosphere of that can be very inspired by scenes or by moments that I kind of see in film or on stage. In this, there's a TV show that they made versions of it in a lot of different countries. It's called Criminal, and it's kind of a mini series. And there's like Criminal Spain and Criminal UK, but it's set in an interrogation room. And I was making this show, and I was kind of watching that, and I was like, okay, how do they create this? How do they create this sense of kind of a slowly closing hand in all of these different interrogations? And that has a real character in how we thought about the space in this show. So yeah, there's always a lot of different kind of, like if there was speech bubbles coming out of my head, those little thought bubbles would be they'd be all over the place, and they'd have some of those inspirations or some of those influences are very, very small and very personal and almost kind of disparate, that someone would say, I don't see the relationship between that and this at all. And then some of them might be a little bit more apparent. But it's like a recipe, it's like a recipe in a cookbook. You're kind of a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Yeah, it took a few different forms. I was working on this show for a really long time. I started working on this show in 2018. So 2018 to 2025 is like there's a lot of time and a creative process. It's kind of like a gas. It fills whatever container you give it. So if you have 5 years to make a piece, your piece will take 5 years, and if you have 3 weeks to make a piece, whatever comes out, that's how long it takes. So so in some ways, I think the fact that I had so long, the nature of the work really evolved, because the last 7 years have been a huge change in how I'm working and what I'm interested in and how I think about work, and the way in which I'm supported to make work as well. So, your support and your ambition and what you realize you're capable of are always in this kind of conversation with each other. So where I started off with what I thought I'd be able to do and what I thought I was capable of and what we finished with, we're like, there's a really big journey between those two things. So to come closer to answering your question, I looked at kind of the fundamentals of the story that we were telling. I looked at the fundamentals of some of the themes I'm interested in and some of the things I'm curious about, which are like the nature of an insider and outsider, who gets to be from a place, what does someone have to do to be considered from a place, to be accepted by a community, the nature of community, which can be so supportive of people who are included in it and suddenly not supportive of people who aren't included in it, and like the duality of that, of the positive and the negative of that. And then the idea that since we're looking at an unsolved crime in this show, that there needs to be people from the past and there needs to be people from the present. So then who is connected to the past, who's connected to the present? So we knew we'd need a victim, we knew we'd need a suspect, and we knew we'd need an investigator. So the three pillars were there, and then how we figured out these other roles was really down to how we wanted to carve the telling of the story. How we did that was that we have this, we have the kind of the original investigator, the original police officer who did the initial investigation. And then we have this kind of radio host who runs a local radio show and takes on a number of different roles through kind of memory and fantasy. And then that's also, you know, to do with people's, like the language of the work moves between acting and dance, and you're finding the right group of people. There's a really, really talented group of people on this show. And everyone is kind of bringing their own little cocktail of specific ways they interact with those forms. And then the roles then very much were kind of crafted in conversation with what was going to like let each person sing themselves as a performer, you know. There's the simple thing of like, I did a big development of it in 2024 and we made this 90-minute show. And I looked at it and I threw out, I would say 80% of it, and I started over. Yeah. We made a 90-minute show, and I just basically took the small parts of it that I felt were working, and I started over because I didn't feel like we were doing what I wanted it to be doing. And that also, talking about casting and roles, like things shifted quite a bit, and it shifted in the form of it. So then we came back in 2025 and we made what is essentially the show that we're doing now. I'm someone who I'm working on, we're working every day that we're in the studio. We're not just working to get the piece back to where we performed it before. We're looking to get it where it's next, what is going to make it better? What is the next place for this work to go? You know, I've made a number of shows, so I'm not inexperienced at making shows, but I've performed thousands and thousands of times. So you know, whatever my experience is in anything else, I've had so much time on stage that I kind of feel that a piece has to kind of always be moving as a performer, and that your content always has more opportunity in it. So we try and approach every rehearsal process, every time we do it, as a chance to kind of say, what are we taking for granted here, and do we have to take it for granted? So there's things like, even the last few days, there's things we found that I think are richer, and the performers are getting more, people are always getting more confident with it. The work can be it can ask a lot of tasks alongside just doing the show. You know, there's a lot of logistics involved, and it's kind of hard to explain, but you'll kind of know when you see the show. There's a lot. You can't just come on and do the thing you're used to doing. You have to also learn how to do a lot of things you're not used to doing. And that can kind of take people's confidence as performers, and it can take the rug out from underneath them a little bit. And then it's through like really relentless practice that you try and get that foundation back for people, so that they can be the performers that they are and that they want to be. So that process is always ongoing. Like, you know, you only get, you know, it's like if, for one show I had to learn how to do, you know, when you get a coin to go down along your fingers. And like, it was a nightmare. It was an absolute nightmare. And like, you know, everything else I was doing got so much worse because I was just so worried about this. But then eventually I can do this and I can do what I need to do, and then there's kind of a magic to it. So it's just a very simple thing of practice makes perfect. But then on top of that, the show is kind of evolving, because once you get past worrying about that, you get to actually see the opportunity of what that moment is. And that's kind of what we're finding on this run, especially. It's not. It's, it is, and it's not. But it's like, I don't think it's the right vehicle alone. I think of dance as action, and I think of dance as even when you hit emotional highs or emotional lows, it's not a verbal experience. It's a physical experience. Like, emotions are they're a physical experience inside you. So the way I think about dance is dance and movement are my way of kind of accessing what someone is really going through, and like the truth of what someone is really dealing with. Which in this show is like a lot of longing, a lot of fear, a lot of ambition, and a lot of resentment. There's a lot of there's really extreme dips and peaks and troughs, something like that. So I think dance is a really great vehicle for that. But ultimately, movement, it's because it's kind of non-denotative. Like, there's no one movement that's going to mean one thing. So much in this work, or in the work that I try to make, is around how I create a world and how I create a context around it. So I'm guiding the audience towards the meaning that I want them to take from that movement, and from the relationship with the movement and what the person's going through, that I want them to fall into. So for me, I don't think movement is the right vessel for a story of this kind of complexity, if it's left to kind of, well, what did you think it meant? My proposal to the audience, and my curiosity, or my questions to the audience, I hope are actually relatively clear. And then hopefully through movement, people are able to kind of feel it at the back of their neck as they're watching, as opposed to just watching it passively, from saying like, oh, that person looks like they're going through something. When you watch someone actually physically working, then I think it has a different kind of something that happens on your skin as an audience as you're watching it happen. Yeah, we try and take care of ourselves. Everyone on this show is really experienced. It's a really experienced group of performers. So like, over your career, you find the routines that you need. My routine, as I get older, it just gets longer. So I can still dance the way I want to dance, but it just seems to take a longer part of my day every 2 years. So just like 5 minutes is added to how much time I need to warm up and how much time I need to cool down. So, we have an hour of people are kind of doing a mixture of strengthening and stabilizing, and then, baths and massage, and every single little weirdly shaped thing that you put to roll out a muscle or relieve tension in a muscle. It looks like a weird torture chamber in the corner of the studio normally, but yeah, everyone's doing well. Everyone knows how to take care of themselves, for sure. Yeah.
Great.
I say that now,
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll check back in with you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I'm manifesting this. It's like, everyone's actually in terrible shape. I'm like, no, people are good. They're fine. Yeah.
A single tear.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think that the show proposes a couple of things I'm curious about. It proposes a couple of questions. That's what I think it does. Like, you're not in control of that. Like, the audience kind of finishes the audience are the people who make the decision really on what your work is about. But for me, I think that it proposes questions around ownership, around whether anyone has a right to own anything underneath their own land. Like, it's an Irish story, but I think it's asking questions that are very universal right now and very relevant internationally right now. What the cost of wanting is, and what the cost of that fixation. how we are complicit in that at times, how we're complicit in it without knowing we're complicit in it, and kind of who is. There's a real question around who is right and who's wrong in these different instances, because you can sympathize with someone while still disagreeing with them, and I don't have a thesis or a hypothesis on that. I just have a kind of a real curiosity about it. So the piece or the work that I'm making at the moment, I find myself very frequently putting characters under a pressure. I try and put a person, and we watch that person go under a really central pressure, and then we kind of watch how they respond to it. And then watching how that person responds to it is my way of saying, like, is that how you'd respond to it? Is that how I'd respond to it? Is that a reasonable way to respond to it? Yeah, I'm kind of curious about the pressure. So I guess that's what maybe people will get to ponder that for themselves when they leave or something. Yeah. My name is Luke Murphy, and I am the choreographer, the writer, and the director of Scorched Earth, which is playing at St. Anne's Warehouse from April 3rd to 19th.